everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History podcast. And today I'm joined by Gil Cadron. He is the host of the Biblical Proportions podcast. I have the links to go to his podcast, check it out in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment at the end of the stream. So, Gil, welcome to the show.
Thank
Good
you.
having you on.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, thank you for joining me. And before we continue any further, could you tell the audience a bit about your podcast and where they can find it?
Yes, so it's called a podcast of Biblical Proportions. You can find it on all the regular podcasting platforms. I've been doing it for a few years now. And what I do on the podcast is I go story by story by story, according to the order in which the stories appear in the book today. And I'm a writer, I'm an editor, Hebrew-speaking writer and editor. And every story I think to myself, what kind of person would write this specific story? According to what the conflicts are, the characters, what God is like, who are the protagonists, what are they like, what are they trying to achieve, the antagonist, the drama. And you can learn a lot about a person from the stories they write. We know this also to be true with film directors and all kinds of artists. Part of them is in their texts, and you can reverse engineer and learn a lot about them. And people write like from their own experiences, their own world, whatever they've seen, whatever they experienced, that's what they write from. No matter if they write a story set in the past, set in the future, doesn't matter. They write according to things that they have experienced. And so, like generally speaking, people who live through happy times, they write happy stories. People who live through tragic times, they write tragic stories. Tragic stories, euphoric times, stressful, rageful, etc., etc. And when you kind of zero in on what the text is about, and then you put that against known historical events and periods and what things were like in recorded Hebrew history, then you see that most of the Bible is like the stories part of the Bible are stories about the dramatic events in recorded Hebrew history from about 600 BCE to 140 BCE, when there's an independent Hebrew state. So like people don't write the Bible, a biblical story, on a random Tuesday for no reason. Like something big happens, like big historical events, such as the siege and destruction of Jerusalem, the different waves of return to Zion, and then Hebrew independence in 140 BC. And so like stories in the Bible, in that sense, they are identical to movies done today that are different if they're made in the 50s, the 80s, or the 2000s. We have several American series of shows and movies that we can see how they change according to what's going on in the present at the time they are written. So in that way, each story reflects the period it was written. That's like the overview of my perspective, and I would be happy to focus on specific examples. I know that you've had Jonathan Adler a few times, the archaeologist, love his work. So I thought we could focus specifically on texts that I can show, and then you tell me what you think, that were written specifically in 140 BC.
All right. So can you tell us what is the evidence that indicates that the text was written in the 2nd century BCE? And are you talking about much of the Hebrew Bible, including the Torah, when you say this?
Excuse me. Yes, parts of the Torah and much of the Hebrew Bible. And the way I say it, I'd like to show it is first, like we'll talk a little bit about 140 BC, what happened then, what was the drama, what were the political factions, what were the political messages, who won, who wrote the story about it. And then once we have 140 BC in mind and we focus on a few texts, just a few examples that I can share, then it will be either an incredible coincidence that everything that we talked about that happened in 140 BC appears in this text supposedly set at a different time in the Bible, either an amazing coincidence or this is a Maccabean addition to the Bible. And I have a few examples, and we could go even further. So it's always like either a coincidence because the political message, the details, what's important, will have like 140 BC all over it. But I wanted to ask you, from your conversations with Adler, how would you describe this dramatic period of 140 BCE when, after the Civil War, the War of Independence, and then an independent Hebrew state under the Maccabees or the Hasmoneans, how do you see this period? Because I think it's an overlooked period.
It sounds like it's a period of reformation to me, like reorganization towards what would eventually become a monotheistic religion.
100%. And I would add that it's a reformation of the Hebrew religion and worship from priestly elitist to populist. That's also conveyed in Adler's work. He found that suddenly everybody starts to celebrate Passover in their homes, in their dwellings, whereas it used to be one of the 3 pilgrimages. You had to go to the temple, and suddenly no one has statues, and just like everything changes and becomes like more of the people and not owned by the priests. So it was a civil war against the wealthy priests, first a revolt, then a civil war, then a war of independence against the foreign empire, the Seleucids, and then independence. And I like to look at it as like part French Revolution, part American Revolution. French Revolution because it's very populistic. It's the masses against the rich. And also the priests are involved, are with the king, so it's kind of the same. And American Revolution because it concludes with independence. So that's a huge moment. After 500 years almost, they are again independent. And the main character at the time, excuse me, his name is Shimon Tassi, or Shimon HaTarsi. It means Shimon the Wise in Aramean. And there are several texts about him in the Bible, I think. I'm happy to show. But to recognize these texts that are about him, let's talk about him a little bit. Shimon, he was the leader, the Maccabean leader at the time of independence. He came in 143 BCE, became the leader, and in 140 BCE, the Hebrews gained independence. So he was the first leader. So he's like a foundational figure in Hebrew history, like a founding father. Excuse me. And he was a leader of men. He was also a general. He was a populist in the objective sense of the word, in that his politics were geared towards the people, the masses. He says that this is where he derives his legitimacy. So he also convened a great popular assembly, and he wrote up a national populist constitution with branches of government and separations of powers. And he freed a lot of Hebrews that were sold as slaves to foreigners at that time. But maybe what he is was most proud of is that he rebuilt the Jerusalem walls. There was a conflict there. The Samaritans were there. The Nabateans were also there. The kind of Arab kingdom. There was a conflict, and he was able to rebuild the wall. You cannot have an independent state without having your capital protected. So that was a big thing, and he was very proud with that. Didn't back down from his enemies. So he was like a populist national leader. He replaced the old priestly elites, right? Kicked out the temple establishment. There was a whole purification thing going from foreign influences. What is the correct Hebrew worship? And after that, we can see in the archaeological record that people start following the rules correctly. So if we just remember just the details that I gave now about Shimon, a real person, ruled from 143 BCE to 134 BCE, foundational figure. And now we turn our gaze to Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah, that's the last book in the Hebrew Bible, from the Ezra and Nehemiah. And we go over Nehemiah. Everything that I just said about Shimon is also true for Nehemiah. Every single detail that I said. Now we can go over them again. Then we'll see that it's just like checks the boxes, one after the other, all of them. So let me go back. And now let's talk about Nehemiah. Okay? Leader of men, a general. I forgot to mention Shimon paid his soldiers from his own money. He was proud of that. That's also Nehemiah. Paid the soldiers from his own money. A populist, convened a great assembly, wrote up a national constitution. It's a charter, called it Amanah. Freed Hebrew slaves sold to foreigners. Rebuilt the Jerusalem walls. Nehemiah is very proud about that. He rebuilt the Jerusalem walls supposedly in Persian times. What was going on in Persian times that they needed walls? What kind of wars were then? There were no wars. And even his enemies are identical. Samaritans, Ammonites, they have also the Ammonites with Shimon and Nehemiah, Ashdod, identical conflict, and the Nabateans, Arabs. There are Arabs in Nehemiah. But the Nabateans, they were an Arab kingdom. Also, Shemaiah takes power away from the priests, gives it to the regular people, and he says, from now on, we are going to follow the rules correctly. We haven't been following the rules. Now we're following. So it's either a Maccabean book that they added, backdated to Persian times, to put their interests on record, pushing their agenda on record. We can go even further into details, and like every single detail will match. It's either a Maccabean book or a complete coincidence that all of these match, just happen to be there. But then, we'll go to other examples and other examples, so it will have to be a coincidence every single time. So what do you think? How does it seem so far? Don't want to dump on you like a million details at a time, please.
I think it's persuasive because I've wondered what to do about Nehemiah, because he's often linked with Ezra. It's kind of weird how that works. And they're supposedly living in a time period while one never refers to another. It's like they're living in the same time, but one never refers to the other. That's kind of odd. But your explanation seems to get around that problem very nicely, because it's really that guy, Shimon, that you're talking about, of the 2nd century BCE, not a separate character, independent character living in the Persian period.
Yeah, and if we go over, people can go over, read the book of Nehemiah. It's not even written like a history book. Like the first 2 chapters, he's pontificating how sad he is. He's so sad. He's a cupbearer, and then the king sees how sad he is, and he wants to help him, and then he appoints him as a governor. The next sentence, okay, he's in Judea as a governor. Does that sound like a plausible story? A cupbearer who's sad and then becomes a governor? It sounds like a rags to riches story, some archetypical story. It's not even written like, let's say, the book of Ezra. It's written like a history book. It's very dry. This is what happened. I went here, I did that. He said this, I said that. This is like a regular history book. The book of Nehemiah has like literary writing, also more advanced Hebrew. And whatever, I'll throw out some more Maccabean stuff in there. In the book of Nehemiah, there's like geographical micro data where everything is like precision perfect. The book of 1 Maccabees, the official historical book from the time of Shimon and later his heir, also is famous for like having exact point perfect geographical micro data where exactly each battle was, on which hill and stuff like that. And so I don't want to go like every chapter. I did it several times. If we'll go every chapter, we can point several times and say, "Oh, here it is, here it is, here it is." But I thought maybe like if we go over several examples, that all of them will point to 140 BCE, maybe that would be better than just like focusing only on Nehemiah. But you're the host, so please tell me what you think.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. Before we do, I want to ask you real quick, do you see overlaps with what you're talking about with Moses? Because you talked about how this guy was freeing slaves and stuff like that. Is there a link here with the Exodus story?
There is definitely, most definitely a link with the Exodus story. For the Maccabees, the Exodus story was very important, and the Passover celebrations were the most important. And they highlighted, if you read specific texts in the Bible, which we can go and look specifically over them, we will see these political messages, as you said, like from my, all the episodes that I did on Passover and Exodus. I already finished Exodus. It's been edited by the Maccabees. They took the different layers, they arranged them the way it is today. A few additions later here and there, but they arranged the narrative as it is, as a liberation from slavery, like the hard details about like actual slavery, not like indentured servitude. The slavery, that's Maccabean. That was important to them. All the nationalistic parts of Exodus, nationalistic parts, and also wars, that's the Maccabees. Everything that was important to them. If you look to the Bible, you just like go and read, go over wars. You will find tons of wars in the Bible, in the book of Joshua, in all kinds of places that are just like completely identical, what are fictionalized battles of actual battles that the Maccabees did with the same enemies, or in the same place. They will be, or just like very, very close, and there will be like the same language and the same conflict. So the Maccabees, it's either everything is a coincidence, right? Or this is the Maccabees. So maybe we can focus on Passover. And I want to show how like parts of Passover, again, either a coincidence or edited by the Maccabees. That's good?
Yeah.
Okay, so before we go to specific verses, I want to go back to Adler's work and tell me if you agree with the way that I describe it, right? So up to Maccabean times, on Passover, you had to go to the temple, Shloshet HaRegalim in Hebrew, the 3 pilgrimages. And then Adler found that at that time, it changes like really quickly, really dramatically. Just like everybody starts to celebrate it at home. And he doesn't want to offer like a solid explanation, as far as I can tell, for why this radical change happened. Like centuries of tradition turned on a dime. We have to go to the temple. No, everybody's doing it at home. I think the explanation is in the Bible, in the rules of Passover, because if we look at the rules of Passover, they tell us that you are not allowed to leave your house on Passover. You have to stay at home, and you have to celebrate it at home, and you have to slaughter the Passover lamb by yourself, not the priest. The priest is supposed to slaughter the lamb, just like a regular person slaughtering. That's unheard of. At the most important festival, everybody just willy-nilly does that. That's only from Maccabean times. So that's just turned on a dime everywhere. And I think just like conceptually and logically, the only way that you change the way that people worship everybody, the way that everybody worships at the same place at the same time, it has to be because you change the rules. Otherwise, everybody agreed at the same time. Okay, now this is what we're doing. We're now chucking our earlier traditions. Now let's start to celebrate Passover at home now. That's not how it goes. The rules have to change. And we have the rules and we have the changes. We have that in the Bible. Okay, there are, in Deuteronomy 16, we have the original rules for Passover, the priestly rules. I can share the screen for a moment and just like read a few verses from Deuteronomy 16.
All right.
All right. Cool. One moment. No. Oh, I can't even go to. I have the website open here.
Okay, I see it.
You see it. Okay. Okay. You shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, to Yahweh your God, from the flock and the herd, at the place that Yahweh will choose as a dwelling for his name. Okay. You have to go to where Yahweh is in the temple. You shall offer the sacrifice there. Okay. You are not permitted to offer the Passover sacrifice within any of your towns that the Yahweh your God is giving you. This is exactly what they start doing in 140 BCE. They are sacrificing themselves in their towns, but only at the place that Yahweh your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. Only there you shall offer the Passover sacrifice in the evening, and you shall cook it, which means with water, okay? And only the next morning you go back home. So these are rules for Passover that are clearly priestly because you have to go to where the priests are, the temple. So these are the original rules of Passover as they were observed until 140 BCE. That's what things that we know from history. It just matches that. Okay. So now let's go to the rules of Passover, which are in Exodus 12. Whatever, details. Excuse me. Then the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. That's diametrically opposed to the previous rules and is in line with reality, again, from 140 BC. So we have Deuteronomy 16 that represents what the Passover traditions until 140 BC. I think it started a little bit after the return to Zion. And then now we have rules that represent the real world, how people did it. And we have details here that would be, again, everything will be diametrically opposed. As if the Maccabees wanted to, when they kicked out the priest, they wanted to just erase everything that they did. They reversed everything, okay? So now everybody slaughters. Everybody themselves takes the blood of the Passover lamb sacrifice and then themselves do what the priests do. The priests, they take with a little plant, they put in the blood, they spray it here, spray it there, they put it on the doorpost of the temple and of the garden of the compound. That happens in the temple. And here they are told, no, you are to do it at home, and you shall roast it over the fire. Okay, so they said earlier you have to boil it in water. They said no, you have to roast it with fire. Okay, not raw or boiled in water. So it's specifically the priestly traditions of Passover are illegal. It's illegal now. Okay, and you cannot, like here, if you try to play by the break the rules. Okay, maybe in the evening I will take a little bit to the temple. Maybe in the morning I will take a little bit to the temple. I will also keep my traditions. No, you shall let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until morning, you shall burn with fire. This is how you shall eat it, and this is basically eat it like I think how they did it when they were in the civil wars. In the Civil War, your loins girded, you have your military stuff, your sandals on your feet, staff in your right hand, and you should eat it hurriedly because I guess they ate quickly. And then you have to put on your house the blood, and this is what protects you from somebody attacking you. The blood that you have on the doorpost, okay? Here they say no plague shall destroy you. In other translations, it's the destroyer. In Hebrew, it's Negef Hamashchit. So this Hamashchit, the destroyer, appears one other time in the Bible. And there it is used as a raiding party. just a raiding party that is harassing civilians. Okay, this is hamashchit. So if you follow all the rules and you yourself sacrifice the Passover lamb according to these rules, not according to the old rules, and you prove that you did it when you put the blood of the sacrifice on your doorframe, then a raiding party, then you will be protected from raiding parties. I don't know. This sounds like fascism or something. This sounds like authoritarians wanting to impose new religious rules and persecute the people who want to do it in their own way. And here they tell exactly how they did it with the hyssop plant. Yeah. So please, I'm passing the baton to you. I cannot hear you. I can't hear you.
Thank you. I still had myself muted on the audio mixer. Okay, so what do you make of the Septuagint in light of all of this? Because some will say, well, doesn't the Septuagint, which was originally just the Torah before Oregon in the 3rd century AD added everything else in it, what about the Septuagint? Doesn't it show that the Torah was already fully written prior to the Maccabean period because it was translated into Greek in the 3rd century BCE? What is your take on that?
That was actually the first thing that I thought about when I started to find this Maccabean stuff. I'm like, how is it possible? Because scholars, they say that the whatever last possible date is 250 or 200, and the Septuagint was already written. So I just looked into it, but apparently everybody agrees that the Septuagint was a work in progress. Even Daniel was written later. So it's just the Hebrews in Egypt, they were close with the Maccabees. So for them, this would be something that they would be into. They're happy with what happened. Why wouldn't they want to update the Bible to its new glorious form? And just this is an amazing happened. This is a miracle. We are independent after 500 years, and they're donating so much money to the temple, and so it's just a joint project. I don't think it requires too many explanations.
So would you say that the Septuagint was created later? Because I've heard some think that they doubt the historical validity of the letter of Aristeas or Aristes, or I almost pronounce that name, and they'll say no, it's not really good evidence that the translation was carried out in the 3rd century BC. It could have hypothetically have happened later. What do you think of that?
I think you know about this much more than me. I was just looking for a reasonable and simple explanation that would, put my mind at ease that this is indeed possible, that I'm not crossing any lines here, how is it wrong. Once I saw, okay, this is definitely possible, I didn't have a reason yet, whatever, because I'm focusing on the Bible, to specifically look into any of this, so you would know more than me about that.
The reason why I was asking that question is when you examined the Septuagint, when you were looking into this back then, does it present a potential problem or not necessarily?
I don't think so.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think so, because also my theories or hypotheses, whatever you want to call them, that I share on the podcast, it's not just 140 BCE. As I said, the way that I see it, between 600 BCE and 140 BCE, the vast majority of the Bible was written and edited. And it's on these incredibly dramatic historical intersections, when there is a reason to write stories, write text, new rules, right? You establish a new state, you have to write new rules, okay? You have new stories. This is who we are. This is who we are. This is how we became independent. It's an incredibly dramatic time, 140 BC. We cannot overlook it. We all have days of independence, in our nations. We know how, of course, it's important. It's ridiculous to say it. Just I feel that sometimes in academia, they line up dates and events without like thinking like, okay, if you lived through this, like, what was it like? Because these are all the dramatic events that I mentioned. They are like life-altering, mind-boggling changes for the good and ill. It's either like complete doom or salvation or independence. It's always huge. Yeah, I don't remember if I answered your question or if
I think you did. And it kind of reminds me of a couple of passages because in the book of Kings, it talks about how in the late 7th century BCE, Hilkiah discovered a law code. Then in the book of Ezra, a couple hundred years later, 5th century BCE, although some interpret it as talking about the 4th century BCE, but that's a fewer people hold that position. But anyway, so a couple hundred years later, that so Ezra brings out another law code. Now, neither law codes are specifically described as looking exactly like the Torah we have, but that could represent that some of the stages. Maybe there was 2 stages, and then the final stage is what you're talking about, the Maccabean period. Yeah,
definitely. I think Ezra, I think what he describes, like his book is a history book that is biased from his perspective. Excuse me, but I don't think he's lying about like general things like that. He brought the canon. It seems to work to me. And then the canon was as it was. So he had his texts, his law code. And if you read the book of Ezra, okay, one thing that you can learn about him immediately, that he was an obsessive compulsive person who wrote like interminable lists. Just you go over his book, it's just like lists of like insane little details, one after the other, insane long lists. And then you learn that Jewish thinkers, ancient Jewish thinkers, they attributed the book of Chronicles, the original version, to him. And that also is just like a whole list. And then you have that in mind. Okay, so Ezra, he came in from Persia. He felt he was on a mission from God. He was bringing the correct, the true canon to the Hebrew people, the correct law to the Hebrew people. And he was an obsessive compulsive person. And he took over Judea. Basically, you read his book, he just took over it. He said, I don't have to pay any taxes. I decide everything. If you disagree, I might kill you. And then he just like does a coup there and expels supposedly immigrants, people that he thinks are not Hebrew. And if you have that in mind and you scan the Bible, you would find many texts that are just like, again, or like a glove to Ezra. All the lineages in Genesis, the minutiae in Leviticus, just like all kinds of details that nobody cares about. Only an obsessive compulsive person would care about that. And also, writing a canon is a job that only an obsessive compulsive, compiling, editing, and writing a canon that only an obsessive compulsive person could do. Like who would have the patience to do all of this? So when I look at all the periods, just like it all matches. Like I have already 90 or 89 episodes that I posted. Of course, I correct myself. You always learn new things. But I didn't find anything that made sense at the time, like we talked now about Shimon being exactly like Nehemiah, and then advancing, and then you're like, now it doesn't work because of something else. That has not happened. It remains solid. The closer you look to the details, and when you put it with the other things, it's just whatever. The episodes are on the podcast, so people can go and listen. And I mentioned the chapters that I go through and whatever. And I'm happy to be scrutinized. Yeah.
It does make me wonder even more, especially with the evidence that Jonathan Adler has brought forth, that there's obviously something seriously wrong with the dating of the Hebrew Bible, and over time it's becoming more and more recognized. I've frequently talked about for years that there's a problem with the dating of both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. Scholars in both fields of New and Old Testament studies are pushing all the text later. It's happening.
Right.
Some people will look at this sideways, say, "Oh, this is ridiculous," but no, we're seeing it happen. It
Definitely.
really is happening.
So let me. You mentioned the New Testament. Okay, just like because I know that you're interested in it. I watched your streams and your videos. Something about Jesus. Okay, but before we get to Jesus, again, a few details about Shimon. A very crucially important person in Hebrew history, ancient Hebrew history. Right? I said he ruled from 143 to 134. That's it. He was a populist. He overturned the corrupt temple establishment. That's what he did. And then in 134 BCE, he was betrayed by a friend, by an ally who stabbed him in the back for the foreign empire, which was the Seleucid Empire. And how was he betrayed and assassinated? This is in 1 Maccabees. Everybody can read. Everybody can now Google. He was assassinated after his last supper with this person that was his some kind of in-law. And it happened in a fort in Hebron. And then if you look to see what the New Testament also says about Jesus and Hebron, you will also find other stuff that matches it completely. Like a devil tempted him to do something wrong in that place, where the other person, Chovav, son of Talami, or Talami, son of Chovav, something like that is his name. So he died tragically, Shimon, exactly this way. Is it a coincidence? I don't think so.
That
sounds like a story.
That also reminds me of Joseph and Judah in the book of Genesis. Judah betraying Joseph, selling him off into slavery. I just had to bring that up. That's a kind of a freaky similarity.
It's a very, very freaky similarity. If you want to, digress a little bit about Jesus, there are other aspects of Jesus that you can connect to a specific person.
Well, what's interesting about what you said is there are traditions like Irenaeus talks about this in the 2nd century AD. That
just tell me who is he? Who is Irenaeus?
He's a church father living in the late 2nd century AD, and he mentioned that there's a group called the Simonians, and they believe that it was Simon of Cyrene who was crucified instead of Jesus. Yeah.
Where is Cyrene? Where is that?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but these at locations in
it's like Syria.
It's in Libya.
Libya.
So that's down there in North Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say something about. I forgot. I lost my point. You said about so he wrote. People worshipped Shimon. This must have been like supremely tragic. Also, his two eldest sons were assassinated at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And his third son, John Hawkins, who was whatever, he replaced him, and he didn't do a good job for 10-20 years until he got his act together. At the end, he also betrayed the people. Please.
What I want to bring up, right now is the Septuagint itself. This is something we need to remember. It's not as secure as people may think. The reason I'm bringing this up is we actually don't have the original Septuagint at all. The original Septuagint was a translation of just the Torah, just to remind everybody, not the Tanakh, not the whole thing. That expanded translation was carried out by Origen in the 3rd century AD in the Hexapla. So the Septuagint we have today is actually Origen's Septuagint, which is post New Testament. That is not. We do not have the original Septuagint. Hypothetically, the text in the Septuagint could have lacked a whole lot of stuff. It could be much shorter than we realize. We just have no way of knowing. We don't have access to it. That's something for everybody to bear in mind.
And at what time did you say that that Oregon version was published that we have?
3rd century AD.
third century AD. So the people at that time, they don't even know like what were the political conflicts of 200, 300, 400 years ago of what goes in, what goes out. They're just like have a whole different mindset. They would have no reason to not want to translate the correct version of the Bible and just keep to something else. I don't think so. So much time has passed. Nobody knows, right? At that time, the Hebrew Mishnah, they don't understand their Bible anyway, right? They're trying to figure it out after all this time, writing new laws.
And Oregon played with it. He fiddled with it massively, because what he did was he incorporated New Testament takes on the Tanakh. So mistranslations and stuff were thrown in there to make it look like that the New Testament was quoting the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, accurately, when in several places it wasn't. It seems to be more deliberate rather than accidental. So it kind of changes the context.
So that works. Like he's the correct way, because now we see that he has like a version that doesn't fit.
Yeah. While I don't deny that there were some floating Greek translations of some text from the Tanakh before that, they weren't collected and put together until Oregon did that in the 1st century AD. And it does seem like to me that he was at least largely responsible for translating the vast majority of it. Like, for instance, there's no solid proof that there's a Greek version of the book of Isaiah. We know the book of Isaiah is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Hebrew, of course.
Right.
But in the Septuagint, the Greek version, we know it absolutely exists. There's even like a manuscript that, I forget what the manuscript is called, that dates to the 3rd century, I believe, AD. But that's the same century that Oregon would have done it. So that's not proof that Oregon didn't do it. And he could have put the mistranslation there about Emmanuel being born of a virgin. And the reason he would put it there was like, oh, well, the Gospel of Matthew is actually quoting it accurately. Nothing to see here. When the older version doesn't use the Hebrew word Betula, it uses Alma. So that's something. I just wanted everybody to think about that. Oregon is attempting to harmonize the New Testament with the Hebrew Bible in the 3rd century AD.
Right. And just because you mentioned it now, let's go a little bit further into this. So a lot of the quotes, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert at all in the New Testament. A lot of the quotes in the New Testament from the Old Testament are from what's called the suffering servant songs. Correct?
I think that's largely correct. Because Isaiah is cited several times. I believe Psalms is cited several times. And when you look at Paul, he's a little bit. So let me see here. Let me see if I can try to pull up something. Oh, like in Galatians, for instance, he quotes the book of Genesis.
Judges.
In Genesis, he talks about Abraham and the born of a woman, Abraham and Hagar. So Paul kind of goes sort of all over the place, but when you get to the Gospels, they try to concentrate more on the later text to try to find narratives in the Old Testament that might have some vague resemblance to Jesus, and apply that to Jesus. So that's what's going on. And then the problem is that they mistranslate deliberately some of the things that's there, because they kind of have to. And then you see all of a sudden that, this Greek version of the Hebrew Bible that Oregon produced in the 1st century AD just magically agrees with it. No. That was because he was trying to harmonize the text.
Yes. And if you follow that lead, okay, so they are quoting, let's focus specifically for a moment on the servant, suffering servant archetype, which is a person who speaks the word of God from his mouth. People do not listen to him, they ridicule him, they beat him even, and eventually he's right, but it doesn't work. And God comforts him, said, even though you thought that you were like only fighting for naught, no, it was still important. It was still important, and there are elements there with like when he was in the womb of his mother. That's when Yahweh chose him, and also Yahweh protects him like in little closed spaces. That's like the imagery there. And for me, as a person who doesn't believe that this is a prophecy written about Jesus, it means that this text, the people writing it, they are referring to a person that has already lived before them, and this is what they are writing about it. And later people appropriate, right, and attach it to Jesus. So if you just look at what the details that they write and you compare it, and everybody can do it, go and read the book of Jeremiah, then you will see that Jeremiah was chosen in the womb by Yahweh. Okay, he was confined in a closed, enclosed space, a hole without water. He said, I was, Yahweh, you made me be Ishmadon, a guy that fights all the time, a man of quarrel. And it didn't work what he did, right? Because he didn't stop the destruction of Jerusalem. And he had to, immigrate to Egypt. And he was very sad. Like, woe is me, right? There's a lot of Jeremiah in that. So when you just like read the suffering servant, and you're not looking into the future, but you're looking to the past, like this actually is like Jeremiah. So this seems to me like another aspect of Jesus is based on the suffering servant who is Jeremiah.
So I want to show everybody something here. This is what I put into a video that I did with Bartosz Adamczewski 3 years ago. When I first brought him on the show. He talked about the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew making use of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, some people try to say, well, Matthew and Luke did not know Hebrew. They just knew Greek. This is a little anomaly here. Because to my knowledge, there is no Greek Damascus document from the BCE period. We only have it in Hebrew. Now, when we look at this, we see an interesting parallel. They're not getting this from the Hebrew Bible, and therefore, even if you believe the Septuagint that Origen preserved, that the part of it that's just the Torah that he brought in as he was expanding to include the whole Tanakh, even if we're to believe that that whole Torah was perfectly copied by Origen, I find that practically impossible to believe. But let's pretend that that's true for a second. Matthew and Luke could not have gotten it from the Hebrew Bible, and therefore they could not have gotten it from the Septuagint either, because they didn't have this. So in Luke, it talks about, I'll just read it. And Jesus asked the experts in the law and Pharisees, is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath or not? But they were silent, so Jesus took him and healed him and sent him away. Then he said to them, if one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well, will you not immediately pull it out on the Sabbath day? And they could not reply to this. If you look at 4Q 265, fragments 6, 6 to 7, let no one raise up an animal which has fallen into the water on the Sabbath day. But if it is a man who falls into the water on the Sabbath day, one shall extend his garment to him to pull him out with it. But he shall not carry an implement to pull him out on the Sabbath day, and if an army, then the text breaks. So if you look at Matthew and see what Matthew has to say about it, he said to them, suppose one of you has only one sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So you see that Matthew and Luke are having different takes on 4Q 265. But how does that work? In other words, how did Matthew and Luke find out about 4Q265 if there's no Greek translation of it? So that's a little paradox. Oh, well, I guess we could imagine that maybe somebody reading it to them is like, oh, I'm going to read it in Greek to you. I find that implausible. Oh, there's a Greek translation of it that got lost. Maybe. No way to know. Or Matthew and Luke, they didn't just know Greek. They also knew Hebrew. Now, the church fathers do claim that the author of Matthew's gospel did know Hebrew. But there's the gospel of the Hebrews, which is attributed to Matthew, which was written by a different person, in my opinion, in a much earlier time, like way before 70 AD, and it's not our gospel of Matthew. Canonical Matthew, biblical Matthew is a different gospel altogether. They just both happen to be attributed to Matthew. But nonetheless, I'd say this is actually a pretty good indicator that Matthew and Luke probably did know Hebrew. And I put the Gospels in the 2nd century AD. I put Paul's letters in the AD 90s.
These texts, you put them at the 2nd century AD?
Most of them, but many of them, but I put Paul's epistles in the AD 90s, into the 1st century.
I'll tell you why I asked. Tell me what you think about it. Now that you were reading this, it reminded me again of the book of 1 Maccabees, where for the first time the debate begins over like what can you and cannot do during the Shabbat. Like how far do you have to go in order to not be active? Because there are people hiding in a cave when the revolt begins with the Seleucids, and on the Shabbat they refuse to protect themselves, and then they're butchered to man, women, and child. And then the Maccabees are like, no, we have to act whether it's on a Shabbat or not on a Shabbat. It becomes like a new theology, and it seems that what you read here is like a continuation of this debate, like what can you or cannot do. Seems like the same culture evolving.
You all right?
Yeah. Sorry, I was a little bit sick, so I'm still coughing. Excuse me.
But to respond to your question, yeah, I think the Gospels are responding to the Dead Sea Scrolls after the Jewish War was over with. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, so is Paul. I think Paul's epistles are misdated. I did a super complicated stream, 2 streams with Derek recently about Paul's letters and the formation of them of the letters, but in which I discussed why the letters should be dated towards the end, in the final decade of the 1st century AD, not in the AD 50s or earlier, but 40 plus years later. Now, when we look at, to come back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, is another example here. Again, this comes from Bartosz Adamczewski's work on this matter. We're looking at 4Q271, the Damascus document. Now, we see that there's a thing going on here about the Sabbath. I'll read from the Damascus document, then I'll read from Mark and Luke. So it says here in the Damascus document, no one should open a sealed vessel on the Sabbath. No one should carry medicine on his person, either going out or coming in on the Sabbath. No one should pick up stone and dust in an inhabited place. No caregiver should carry a baby on the Sabbath, either going out or coming in. No one should provoke his servant, his maid, or his employee on the Sabbath. Now let's see what Mark has to say on this matter. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They were watching him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, come forward. Then he said to them, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save life or to kill? But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out. And his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, now to destroy him. Now, Luke's take is, on another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees were watching him to see whoever he would cure on the Sabbath so they might find grounds to bring him an accusation against him. But he knew what they were thinking. He said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come and stand in the middle." He got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to destroy it?" After looking around at all of them, he said to him, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was restored, but they were filled with fury and began discussing with one another what they might do to Jesus. So we see that the Gospels are kind of mocking the Damascus document, mocking other Dead Sea Scrolls. And this would be kind of a bold thing to do in the first century. But if it's in the second century, the temple's been destroyed for decades, and the scrolls are kind of being phased out of the picture. But the Gospels are still the Gospel writers are aware of it. That makes perfect sense to me, because now they're ramming this down people's throats, and that's what's going on here. And as I brought up earlier with this example, you see Matthew and Luke mocking of 4Q 265. Now, I would say that Luke's version looks more similar to 4Q 265 than Matthew's version. And Matthew is kind of like, in some way, trying to sort of tone it down, while Luke is maintaining more of the core of the message. When I look at that, I look at it the same way, but I imagine that we are both looking at the Hebrew Bible. You're seeing the evidence isn't quite matching a preconceived notion that many have about the formation of the Hebrew Bible. Now, I saw this in the chat too. Some people say, "What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? What about the Dead Sea Scrolls?" Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are largely 2nd century and 1st century BCE text. Now, some of them are supposedly hundreds of years earlier, like some smaller parts of it. What is your take on that? Do you think there are elements in the scrolls that are a lot older than the 2nd century BCE?
The way that I work on my podcast, I go and look for something only when I need to, right? Like, I didn't know anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls before I had to look into it and learn about it. So when I found all these Maccabean elements, I wanted to see if it works, like if it's not contradicted by the Dead Sea Scrolls. So when we look at the political situation leading up to 140 BCE and after it, right? So it was like a French Revolution, the peasants, the masses against the rich and the foreign empire. And then at the end, they are independent and they are anti-priestly. We saw that with the Passover rules. We can go over other examples. Their political agenda was to replace the old elites with new elites themselves, their allies. It was a coalition. And then if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls with that in mind, that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by the losers who were just kicked out from the temple, and you zero in on the details, then you see that also matches. I have yet to run into a problem with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The opposite, for example, all of their calendars and their older festivals, for example, Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks, which was the most important festival for the priests, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's like a mathematical calendar, and every year begins on a Wednesday, and just like they count the days. It's insane. Again, obsessive compulsive. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And then you see what the Maccabees did to them. They erased the old weeks festival as it is described in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like, we don't know anything about weeks except that it's celebrated 49 days after the beginning of harvest. There are no details about it in the Bible, but there are tons of details about it from the people who lost and whose most important festival, according to their text, was eradicated and just paved over, and now we don't even know what we're celebrating. So I like to look into the Dead Sea Scrolls whenever I need to cross match and see sometimes even little details. For example, in the creation story in Genesis, there is a minor difference with like a minor a word where the water gathers in a mikveh, like a place of water, or in one place, a mikveh or a place. And then if you also look at the changes that were made, then the priests, they came in with the return to Zion. They came in Persian times, and they loved Persia. And you had Gad Barnea on. They loved Persian worship and stuff. They had no problems with that. They rolled with that. Then they rolled with the Hellenists. And then somebody took away the religion, changed it, and I think that you can track that also in that specific word, because they wanted to eradicate this mikveh, which was a priestly relic from Persian times, so they changed it to one place. Instead, it's just like even a few lines you don't even have to erase. So just like sometimes like a tiny detail fits the story, and you're like, that's also nice. But I want to ask you, do you want to see some more examples of texts that will match the same way with 140 BC?
Yeah.
Okay. So 1 second. Let me...
Are you going to share that text document?
First, let me talk a little bit about Matityahu. Matityahu, if you remember, Mattathias, he's the guy who, threw the first stone that became a revolt, a revolution, a war of independence, a civil war, whatever, etc. And that started in the city of Modin. That's a little bit, that's near Jerusalem. Okay, he was a very important person. Like, at least the Maccabees thought he was important because he's listed as the guy who, again, gets the ball rolling. And the way that it's described in one of Maccabees, so there are problems for his people, and he comes out to the people in a time of crisis, okay? And he kills a king's man, and he kills a traitorous Hebrew from his perspective. And then people snitch, and he flees from the king, flees as a fugitive to the deserts of Modin. Okay, so just like very specific details, comes out to his people, kills a king's man, a traitor gets into conflict, kills a traitorous Hebrew, snitch on him, is a fugitive in the deserts of Modin. So I don't know if you remember the beginning of the book of Exodus. Moses, that's in chapter 2. After the baby Moses story, Moses comes out to his people, kills an Egyptian man, gets into conflict with a traitorous Hebrew. Then people snitch on him. The king hears about it, and he flees as a fugitive to the deserts of Midian. Midian. So I bumped into that a couple of years ago, and I was like, this is so random. Why would this Moses story, that also doesn't make any sense as a regular story, if people go read it, there is no moment of discovery when Moses discovers that he's actually Hebrew and not Egyptian. He just goes out, see their suffering. When did he see it? When did he learn? And then immediately there's conflict with a foreign official, foreign person, conflict with a traitorous Hebrew, snitching, fugitive, Midian Modin. So I was like, okay, I don't think this is a coincidence. But in order to prove that this is not a coincidence, I want to zoom out and look at the whole beginning of 1 Maccabees and put it up against the beginning of Exodus. So the first chapter and a half of Exodus, the first chapter and a half of 1 Maccabees. So now let me recount the first chapter and a half of Exodus. And I can tell you ahead of time that everything that I'm saying now is identical in the first chapter and a half of 1 Maccabees. It's like 11, 12 straight details, identical. It begins with lists of people that are already dead, important people. Then an evil king rises, just like that, turns on the Hebrews, subjugates them, sends them a tax collector, Sarmisim, kills their baby boys. Okay, he's even there's a baby boy raised in a hostile foreign court. And then Matityahu comes out to his brothers. Moses comes out to his brothers, sees their suffering, gets into a conflict with the Egyptian man, treacherous Hebrew. There's a snitching, fugitive, Modi'in. This is Exodus. 1 Maccabees, if you read it, have it, begins with the names of the important people who are long gone, the King Darius, then Philip, and Alexander, and so on. Then an evil king rises, Antiochus IV. When he was a kid, he was raised in a hostile foreign court in Rome. He, just like that, persecutes the Hebrews, sends them a tax collector. That happens with just before Matityahu's thing. Kills their baby boys. That's in 1 Maccabees. I don't believe it, but that's in 1 Maccabees. He kills their baby boys. So we're like, everything is identical. Then he gets into a conflict with a king's man, a traitorous Hebrew, snitching, fleeing as a fugitive instead of Midian, which is a fictional place that does not exist, Modi'in, the real place. So this is like 11, 12 identical in the same order. Maybe there is one or two that the order of events were flipped, but as I laid it out like that, this is the beginning of 1 Maccabees. This is the beginning of Exodus. So maybe it's another magical coincidence. That's the first Maccabean thing that I bumped into on the podcast. Maybe it's a magical coincidence, but if it's a magical coincidence, then I will run into problems down the road because not everything will match. There are no problems down the road. There are a lot of Maccabean texts in the Bible if we're just looking for them. What we know about the Maccabees from what they wrote and from archaeology and history, and now we just have to read text and not think that the order in which they appear has any bearing on the order in which they were written. That you can add anything at the last moment before the printing press. Who would know what was written when? So people have like a hard time conceptualizing that the Bible would be edited at that time, even though this period fits the bill. A reformation, as you said, there's a reformation of the Bible, changing of the rules, changing of the elites, changing of the message. Now it's a struggle, right? Exodus is now a struggle. If you read the earlier versions, for example, the P narrative, the priestly narrative, it's super calm. You know from the beginning that everything will be fine. Everybody's relaxed. Tons of Persian elements, Persian Zoroastrian elements splattered all around the priestly source that most scholars agree was written in Persian times. Just like have a list of like 20 Persian Zoroastrian elements there in the priestly source. And that's like you can read it separately also, like as a standalone text as it was written. And then the Maccabees just added all the versions together to have like one epic story, because this is like at the time of Greek literature. You want an epic story with a hero, Moses. We can talk about Moses if you want to. I have some stuff about Moses. And again, it's either a magical coincidence or it's a Maccabean editing of existing text plus adding their romance to plug holes and to push their political message and how they see the world, and they publish it. I don't think all of it is a coincidence, but I don't know. Tell me how you see this.
I don't disagree at all. I don't think it is a coincidence. I see what you're saying.
Okay, so you want another example? There's another example that I have lined up from, if people remember the story of David versus Goliath, very famous story. Goliath is a Philistine. The Philistines are Hellenistic people. Okay, so the Seleucids are also Hellenistic people. A lot of the mentions about the Philistines in the Bible they are stand-ins for the Seleucids or other Hellenistic people, whatever, maybe the Ptolemies, depending when it was written. But if you find like wars against the Philistines with details, cross-check with Maccabean wars against the Seleucids. So in 140 BC, no, sorry, not in 140 BC, in the revolt and the revolution, the first actual popular leader after this Matityahu fellow dies is Judah the Maccabee. He's the first Hebrew military hero in recorded Hebrew history. I'm not talking about like mythology or stories or stuff. This is a person that we know that he lived and existed, and he was a Hebrew military leader. Before that, in Persian times, there were no military heroes. Nobody was fighting. In Babylonian times, there were no military heroes because they were being killed. Everybody got killed. So this is like the first time that you have like a Hebrew military hero. And his thing is like, I don't care about the odds, the few versus the many. We don't have any equipment. They have armies and armor and swords, and we have slingshots and bows and stuff, and we don't have the swords that they have. It doesn't matter. Yahweh will give us victory in battle because the Yahweh decides who wins. Okay, you just have to believe. And he shocked the enemy, and he was like the archetypical underdog, had many, many fantastic victories. Let's just mention two of them. The first one, he killed an important Seleucid general, Apollonius. He killed the general, took his sword. Okay? His last important battle, Judah the Maccabee, was against another very important general, a very arrogant general that threatened the Hebrews several times, called Nicanor. He was killed. Judah cut off his head and took it with him to Jerusalem, and the Hebrews pursued the remaining soldiers that scattered all the way down south. Okay? So this is Judah the Maccabee, some details about Judah the Maccabee. Now, if you go and look at the story of David versus Goliath, everything that I just said is there. Okay, we can go and check out. Not everything was written by the Maccabees, but I highlighted some stuff, and we can see that it's just there. Again, maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe not.
Let me take a super chat question real quick before you get to that.
Sure.
Solar Knight, thank you for your super chat. Israelites use moon for Sabbaths, the new moon first, full moon second. Genesis 1:14.
Israelites use the moon for the Sabbath, new moon first. Is that a question for me or for you?
I think that's for you. I'm not sure though. I think it's for you.
I'm not sure if I didn't if I don't answer it the way you meant it. Please let me know. But what I can talk about this, I recently had a huge episode, the most difficult episode that I had on the podcast. It was about the changing of the calendar in Maccabean times, the official calendar that was set according to the sun. Again, as I said, like super mathematical, and that you cannot know yourself when the month begins or the year begins. You have to go to the mathematician priests that do all the calculations. They change it into a lunar calendar. And something very basic that happens here is that this is an extremely populistic change. Everybody can go outside, look at the window, see the moon. I know that the month begins. I don't need to go to the priests. Everybody, wherever they are. So this is another aspect of the populistic change of the Bible and of Judaism that matches 140 BC. Like first, it was elitist priestly, set according to the sun. And it was always the same. All the years were the same in the past, in the future, everything. Like and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they talk about that. It's, people switched the calendar from according to the sun, according to the moon, and now you do not know when the months will begin, and they always change, and it's not according to the same day. Like Hebrew holidays, we know that they're not on set date. They always move around now because they're not according to to the normal calendar. So that happened in 140 BCE. There were a few rounds later, but that switch changed. I don't know if this is what she meant. I'm not an expert in Judaism, I should say.
All right. So I got your screen up.
Okay. So I need to scroll. I would need to scroll down to where was it? I was here. Okay. Can you see me scroll down?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. So this is leading up to the battle against, and I want to give credit here to Ron our mutual listener / viewer that actually helped set this up. So shout out Ron. He first pointed me to the similarities in David versus Goliath to everything we just talked now about Judah the Maccabee. Okay, okay. This very day, Yahweh will deliver you into my hand. He says that to the Philistine. Okay, the Philistine. They say here. They don't say here. He said that to Goliath. Okay, because they're talking about other Philistines. And I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds in the air and the wild animals. Okay, why? So that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. This sounds to me very, very Maccabean. When the Philistines drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. He put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. And we were told before that he was huge, and he was heavily armored. Huge armor. It's a little bit funny even. He has like a huge pole for like a sword or like a lance, and he has a huge shield that is taller than David. And David has nothing. He tried to put on a shield before, and he was like, couldn't move. He's like, just give me my tunic and give me my slingshot, a Maccabean weapon also. This is the guerrilla weapon. The few against the many. Here, the little one against the big one. The big one is heavily armed, a trained soldier. It says it over and over. The Hebrew, he's just like doing what he could. Okay, sling the stone, kill the Philistine. There was no sword in David's hands. Then David ran over, stood over the Philistine, grabbed his sword, what Judah the Maccabee did to Apollonius, drew it out of his sheath, and killed him. Then he cut off his head with it, what he did to Nicanor. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Just like what happened after Nicanor. The troop of Israel, Judah, rose up with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gat. That's in the south, the same direction. I checked whatever. It's about 10, 15 miles apart, okay? But both of them fled in the same direction, the losing Hellenistic soldiers, and they were all killed in both cases. Okay, and then David took his head, the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem. Exactly what Judah did with the head of the real Hellenistic general. So I don't think this is a another magical coincidence. I think these are Hellenistic additions where they took the existing story of David and added details, as you said earlier with the Christian stuff in the New Testament. They're just like, oh, this is now our guy is part of this. This is a time of miracle. Let's put our heroes in the book. And if you go through the book of Kings and Samuel, you will also find other stories and anecdotes about the different Maccabean leaders, including Judah the Maccabee. This is just like one example.
Mm-hmm. And there's no solid proof that not that I'm aware of, that 1st and 2nd Samuel, or that any of it is early in terms of manuscript tradition. It's theoretically possible the whole thing on both ends could be later.
Have you heard about the new AI research that involved Samuel?
No, I don't think I did.
Like a month ago, I can send you a link.
Please.
Scholars have apparently for some time have been discussing whether there is, like in 1 Samuel, a long string of stories about the ark that goes from one place to the next. But it concludes in 2 Samuel, and they have been debating whether the last story is connected to the first part, which is much longer. And now most of them said that it's not. So they put the AI to see whatever. Everybody can download the AI. I have one of my members on Patreon downloaded the site's open source, and we're trying to run things, compare texts. It does also stuff that whatever humans cannot notice and stuff like that. But it concluded that it's not the same. And it also concluded that this part of 1 Samuel, it's not part of any of the sources that we know, like the priests in the Babylonian captivity, right, the royalty in Judea and stuff like that. It's not part of all the groups that they know from the documentary hypothesis, which, by the way, the AI confirmed that the different sources are actually distinct. So they don't know where it comes from, like the big chunk of First Samuel. I talked about it a little bit on my podcast. I did like a course about that. I think that this was written around the most of First Samuel was the older layer that was written in Ptolemaic Egypt, in Alexandria, maybe 270 BCE or 250 BCE, and then it was turned into a Maccabean book, mostly Second Samuel. So that worked well with like the AI, and I had no problems in that. They just like are not looking for this group of Hebrews in Alexandria, but once you do, you talk whatever. I read a little bit. It's a little bit funny, basically. First Samuel, there are a lot of stories that are a little bit funny with the ark. They get how do you call it? what they get a pain in the ass? How do you call it? It gives them. I forgot the English word for it. One second. Let me translate. Sorry. Hemorrhoids. The ark gives them hemorrhoids, this Philistine village. And they're like, oh, this is too hard. We have hemorrhoids. Let's pass it on to the next Philistine village. Then they get hemorrhoids. Like, and they pass it on from one to another. And then they pass it on to a Hebrew village. And also it kills them. So that's also funny. It's just, for me, I read it. I was like, I'm sorry, this is a funny story. Let me read about, and the only place that I could look for that would be plausible would be Ptolemaic Egypt, when they're comfortable and relaxed enough to write comedies. So let me look into Greek comedy, and there is a genre. It's either middle Greek comedy or late Greek comedy. One of the two, people can go and look at it. That fits the genre where you make fun of important people. So it's like the important people are a bit ridiculous, and they are like Samuel is ridiculous. David is ridiculous. Saul is ridiculous. Try to kill him and just like misses every single time. And hatches a plan to get David to marry his own daughter, and then he's married into the royal family, and then he deposes him. It's a funny story, but I digressed a little bit. Sorry.
And before we close, can you remind everybody where they can find your podcast?
Sure. It's called A Podcast of Biblical Proportions. Everywhere, Spotify, Apple, wherever there are podcasts. A Podcast of Biblical Proportions. Again, I go story by story by story by story, and just like focus on the story. Who do I think wrote it, and when would it be plausible that this story would be written? And what happens when you put the history and the stories together? They complete and complement each other. I'm learning everything on the go. I started this. I'm just like a writer and editor, and I was curious about the Bible to read. I have no agenda. I didn't know anything. This is how I can. And I learned that once you combine them together, you learn a lot about the story. Like the story pops, and you understand all the details when you know when it was written, who and what for. And then the story helps you understand the history better, because it puts in some details that the regular historian would not put. It would put emotion. It would put human elements in it. And then you're like, oh, so indeed, if we put these two together, then we can learn more about the Babylonian captivity, more about the return to Zion, more about 140 BCE, so much more about 140 BCE. And Jacob, it's the more you learn about 140 BCE, the more it connects to the New Testament. It's just like a straight line of evolution of the values and details. It goes straight. It's like, whoop, no problem whatsoever. Just the things that I had to check, right? It's not my jam.
The links to Gil's podcast will be in the description below. It will also be in the pinned comment. That being said, Gil Cadron, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It was a blast.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.